Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of 13 Days, The Chronicle of an Escape from a German Prison, by John Caunter. Chapter 5, Crossing the First Two Rivers.
After walking steadily away from the camp in a westerly direction for about 1.5 miles, I found running water, which was a godsend. Here I filled my water bottle, an empty wine bottle bound round with cloth and string, and had a good drink. Pushing on to the southwest, I continued along a rough track running through marshy ground. By this time, the dawn had spread its light sufficiently to make objects clear a long way ahead. From the marshy ground rose the cries of curlews and peewits, the drumming of snipe and the hoarse croakings of many frogs making an unearthly tout ensemble. It was a strange feeling to be out and walking freely along this quiet track, and the mist which hung about the ground on either side of the road gave a weird shape to everything. For the first time, I was able to think of other things than the details of escape, and I counted up my chances. At any rate, I had got out, and if I were caught, I should at least have made a determined effort and would be able to feel I had done my duty in attempting. After an hour's walking, I left the marshy country behind and struck woods and clumps of young pine trees. At last, at about 4:30 a.m., I approached a metalled road which ran across my front. I advanced cautiously to the edge of it and then heard German voices. Some boys and women were milking and tending cattle not far away. Thinking that to move forward at this hour, which is always one of the most active in the day with the hard-working farmers of Germany, would be to risk detection, I decided to rest where I was in hiding. I found a thick clump of young firs within 60 yards of the road and deposited my lumpy bag down in a place where the moss was thick and soft. A drink of water, followed by a few biscuits and a piece of chocolate, sufficed for a meal, and then I lay down and tried to sleep, which I found impossible to do, although I was tired enough. It was bitterly cold lying still, and my clothes, wringing wet with perspiration as they were, clung to me and took away all natural warmth. I suppose I got an hour's sleep before 11 o'clock, when it got so hot that it became quite unpleasant in my hiding place. These hours passed very slowly, and I felt the need of someone with whom to talk. At 3 o'clock, I thought I would move forward and try to get up to the bank of the river without being seen. After crossing the road, I proceeded for 1/2 mile or so before leaving the thick cover, which was plentiful hereabouts, and got into a grove of large trees at the side of a field. Now I discovered that any further advance was out of the question at that time, as all the fields in front of me were hay fields in the process of being cut, and I could see 14 or 15 Germans working at the cutting. I stayed where I was until about 8 o'clock, when I saw that most of the workers had left the fields and gone home. I pushed on a bit now, making a detour to the north, and soon saw the main road bridge over the river. By watching this, I came to the conclusion that it had no guard posted on it, at any rate by day, but many civilians were walking across, and a hay cart passed every minute or so. Pushing on again, I crossed the main road and got into the thick cover to the north of it and close to the river. As I was filthily dirty from the dust storm, I thought I would bathe at a safe spot well away from the bridge, deciding to post myself in the bushes close up to it as soon as it became dusk. The bathe passed off without incident, and after all, as it struck me while I was swimming about, what better disguise could I have than nakedness? If anyone came along, I could act the German very thoroughly, knowing enough of the language to answer any question while swimming. The bathe was delightful and refreshed me exceedingly. After dressing, I found that it was practically dark, so set off for my hiding place close to the bridge. I got safely to it and lay down in a ditch running through some bushes within 10 yards of the beginning of the wooden structure. My plan was to cross as soon as it became quite dark. I had been there scarcely 10 minutes when I saw 2 German women come out of the house at the other end of the bridge and cross over towards me, followed at some 30 yards by a German soldier. He caught them up just opposite me, and all 3, talking hard, went some 40 yards along the road, and then sat down in the bushes on my side of it. Here they were, soon joined by another soldier, who came from the direction of the camp, as I discovered on hearing his voice. I was now so placed that I was actually between them and the bridge, but dared not move, as I was certain to make the bushes surrounding my hiding place rustle and the dead sticks lying about crack. I waited in hopes that they would go away, but it got quite dark, and still the giggles of the women and the low tones of the men continued. At last, at about 11 o'clock, the two women got up, and after standing talking for a few minutes, I heard one of them say to the men, "You must now remain quite quiet. Nicht?" And they answered yes, and I heard them all say good night, and the women walked back along the road across the bridge and went into their own house, leaving the two men still in the bushes. I waited for them to go also, but they did not budge. A silence as of the dead came over everything, and I knew then that they were in ambush, and a very cunningly placed one, too. Naturally, anyone looking to see if a bridge was guarded or not would expect to find the sentries on the middle or at either end of the bridge itself, and could then clear away from the place if it proved to be unhealthy. However, this ambush was placed so as to catch any wretch moving cautiously along the side of the road, straining his eyes eagerly forward to see if the near end of the bridge was or was not guarded, little thinking, as he did so, of any cunning ambush 50 to 60 yards away from the bridge itself. Thursday, 21st June. I now set myself to tire the Germans out by waiting, and hoped that in the early hours of the morning they would be less alert than usual. I lay there, bitten all over by mosquitoes, and having a very uncomfortable time of it. I heard one of them cough, and then, after an hour or two of silence, another cough. Altogether, I waited about 4 hours, and it was not till roughly 3 o'clock that I thought I could risk a move. Very cautiously, I now began to crawl on all fours towards the road, carefully feeling all the ground as I did so in order to be able to remove the dead sticks lying across my track. By pushing through the bushes very slowly, I avoided making much of a noise and gained the embankment along the top of which ran the road, without causing any suspicion. Here I had a breather, and then continued my crawl upwards. I reached the top of the bank, which was the edge of the road, and knowing that I was well against the skyline to the eyes of watchers below, did not waste much time before turning towards the bridge, and keeping well down, crawled steadily onwards, reducing the space of time in which I risked being seen very rapidly. Another 50 yards on all fours, and I ventured to get onto my feet and walk, in my rubber-soled shoes. 50 yards more, and I was safely off the planking of the bridge and onto the road proper, with plenty of cover all round me. As my clothes were of a light coffee tint, they assimilated very well with the colors of the dusty road and the white-painted woodwork of the bridge. I felt inclined to roar with laughter at the ambush after gaining the far side of the river, and would dearly have loved to have shouted insults and jibes back at them, instead of which I continued my walk quietly along the road, keeping well to one side under the trees which so often border country roads in Germany. I soon came to a village, and feeling that this one was too close to the bridge, which had been guarded, to require anything for itself in this line, walked through it without even causing a dog to bark. I continued for an hour before anything else happened, and then I very nearly made a bad error. I was sleepy, I suppose, and was not so sharp on the lookout as I ought to have been, and I suddenly got an awful shock on distinctly seeing in front of me, in the first light of the dawn, 2 men in dark clothes approaching. I immediately turned about and walked away from them as hard as I could go. Gaining on them rapidly, I continued till they were too far behind to be seen, and then jumped into the corn on the right of the road, and after running 50 yards into it, lay still. Sure enough, these 2 men had slowly continued their walk, and now passed me, carrying on for 100 yards before they also stopped. Thinking that it was time to be off, especially as it was getting lighter every moment, I took a detour through the cornfields, and striking the road about half a mile further on, crossed it and took a turn in the corn on the other side. Then, after about a mile of making winding tracks through their precious wheat, rye, and barley crops, I again struck the road and hurried along it to make up for lost time. This wandering about I considered necessary in order to delay and perhaps bamboozle any police dog put on my track. I had no doubt that these 2 men were policemen, and that they had only just caught a glimpse of me, which had made them curious. I am certain I again had to thank my whitish suit for my immunity from determined pursuit. After this little excitement, I had to move very rapidly, as it was already nearly daylight, and I wished to get to the banks of the next river before hiding. Pushing along the road, I struck a small town and crossed the end of it, taking a level crossing on the way. Seeing nobody at the station nearby, I gained more confidence again and was not so upset as I might have been when I found that I had to walk for a mile or more along a road flanked on both sides with houses. At last, and by no means too soon, I got to the riverbank, had a drink, refilled my water bottle, and set about looking for a hiding place in which to sleep during the day. This river, the Lena, is about 70 yards broad and is deep and fairly sluggish. There was a bridge crossing it about a mile downstream from the place at which I drank. I found a hiding place not far from the river, but after a short while I began to think that it was a bad one, as although in this district most of the hay had been cut, one field quite near had still to be done. So off I went to look for a better place. I found a thick hedge which looked likely, and then suddenly saw a girl bathing 80 yards away. However, I quickly decided that she could never have seen me and began to pull aside some brambles with a view to getting in. Suddenly, without any warning, I heard just behind me, "Guten Morgen." I turned in a second and found myself face to face with a flapper dressed all in white on her way to bathe. I growled back, "Good morning," and she passed on. I expect she also got a shock, for I must have been a wild-looking object. I decided now that this was no place for me and began to make tracks as soon as she had moved away. I hadn't gone 100 yards when I heard a man's voice and the yapping of a dog come from where I had spoken to the flapper. He was speaking to the girls, so fearing that my girl might have mentioned seeing an extraordinary apparition on her way, and so arouse suspicions in the mind of the man, I cleared out and went through the woods, which were fairly thick here, for about a mile. I was lucky now to find a deserted factory quite close to the bridge which I had seen previously. By this factory was a thick patch of small fir trees, into which I forced my way and found excellent cover among the dense undergrowth and lower branches of the trees. I tried to sleep, but had little success, and was again worried by flies and heat at about midday. My watch had stopped, so I arranged some sticks so that when their shadow pointed north by my compass, I should know it was roughly noon and be able to set my watch. I was keeping a collection of hieroglyphics, which I cannot honor with the title of diary. I purposely made it unreadable and abbreviated all the words so that it would convey nothing to the Boche if they caught me. Unless one keeps some sort of record, it is very easy to forget the day of the week, etc. And that is necessary knowledge, as Sunday is a special day in Germany and must be treated differently by an escapee. It had become very uncomfortable in my hiding place, and sleep was out of the question for some reason, so I thought that as I had lost time already by being delayed both nights, I must try to make up for the delay, and what would help to do so, more than anything else, would be the crossing of the Leine by daylight. The more I thought of it, the more I wished to get that river behind me as soon as possible. I decided that at any rate I would scout the bridge and then make up my mind. This proved easier than I had hoped, because I found that the bridge had no cover anywhere near it, so that I was able to see without any trouble from quite a distance away that there was no sentry on the bridge or in the neighborhood. There being no cover, ambushes were out of the question. I thought then that I might easily cross at once, as at night there was always the possibility of finding that a sentry had been posted simply for the hours of darkness, those being the hours during which prisoners generally move, a fact that the Germans know well. Accordingly, I got onto the road and walked boldly along it, reading a German newspaper which I had found and kept the day before. Just before reaching the bridge, I met a very nice-looking German girl carrying 2 pails of milk. She deigned to honor me, tramp though I looked, with a sweet smile and a most encouraging, "Good day." I suppose the shortage of young men in the fatherland was accountable for this. It would hardly have been due to my personal beauty. However, She didn't meet with much response beyond a surly, "good day" from behind my newspaper. On the bridge itself, I met an older woman who just looked at me and didn't answer my good day. That made me hurry on somewhat. I got across without any trouble and didn't see a sign of a sentry, and I was not surprised at that, seeing how near the Aller and Lina are to each other. It would mean many more men called away from farm work to arrange for the guarding of the crossings of the Lina as well, a fact which hardly recommends itself to the Boer authorities just at present.
This concludes today's reading of 13 Days, The Chronicle of an Escape from a German Prison, by John Caunter. Join us also the day after tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.